I was looking for a transformer that I wanted to use in another project, and I remember I had this thing in here that had the sort of transformer I had in mind. So I went out to the repository of junk and located this device, and I made it about 35 years ago. And it's got two power supplies, 0 to 30 volts, about 1 amp, two oscillators, sine and square, few frequency ranges and output levels and stuff, and two amplifiers. Yeah. The lids are loose and the other one's around the place somewhere, and this is what's inside it. There's the two transformers I was thinking of. But yeah, there's quite a bit of work in there, and rather than pulling it apart with those transformers, maybe I should try and fix it up. I've pretty much burnt out every element in there at one stage by abusing it, so every one of these things will need to be repaired, and it looks like I've scavenged some banana terminals from there, but apart from that I think it's complete. And there's spiders in there, so yeah, it needs a bit of a vacuum. And I located these power supplies, amplifiers and oscillators are all projects from electronics magazines from back in the 70s and 80s. So I've got the documentation on it still, so I should be able to fix it fairly easily. Let's have a look at the projects in it. First of the power supplies, they're project 162 from Electronics Today International, December 1982. 30 volt 1 amp fully adjustable protected power supply. So that was the box they would have put the project in, but I've adapted it into this box and put two of them in there, one off each of these transformers. I think everything, there's two of everything, two power supplies, 2 amps, 2 oscillators, and I think what the A of each is on one transformer and the B on each is on the other. So they're isolated A to B, not from power supply to oscillator to amp, but from the A and B of each. There's that. Schematic's fairly straightforward, that shouldn't be too hard to fix. And blah blah blah. And there was a later article on this thing, like a year later or so. No, a couple of years later, June 84, goof-proofing it. The current limit protection obviously didn't work sometimes, so a modification which I haven't incorporated in this, but maybe I will if I ever get around to repairing it. So that's the power supply. Then there's the oscillator. This is from Electronics Australia, June 78, that's the oldest part of it, that's these guys. Again, not too complex. Should not be hard to fix, except for being hard to get at everything, of course, the way I've built it. I'll have to pull each board out and test them separately. And there's a there's an errata to it as well in August 78. So might have to incorporate that. Probably wasn't incorporated in this. And finally, a very simple general purpose audio amplifier. This is project 453 from Electronics Today International again, April 1980. And very simple. It's 20 watts into a 4 ohm load. And I couldn't find any erratas to this, so yeah. So that's what's in it, and I'll give it a clean up and do a bit of testing, see how much of it still works. I think I've managed to burn out every part of it. So I've given it a bit of a clean up. Apart from the missing binding posts there, we've also got a missing TO3 cover for that one. But apart from that, it seems to be pretty complete. There's a loose capacitor here that goes onto this waveform switch, which I suspect is this guy here. So that shouldn't be hard to fix, but won't worry about it right now. Those missing terminals, I think Two of them went to this contraption, the poor man's dummy load. Don't know where the black ones are though. So now I want to turn it on and see what happens, but this thing hasn't had any volts in it for decades, so the electrolytics may need a bit of reforming, so I think I'll run it through that variac up there and just gently wind up the voltage in stages until I'm putting in the full 240, and then see what works and what doesn't. Now, while we're in here, I haven't had a good trace around inside, but we've got the two power transformers which follow where all their outputs go. Most of them go into the power supplies, but I see there are little heat sinks and regulators down here, so it looks like I've put local power supplies for that and for the amplifier, or maybe they're the output transistors. Yeah, they're probably the output transistors, but maybe I've got local regulators and there's no one there for this guy, and maybe this just gets its power directly from rectified in here somewhere. Haven't traced it out, but anyway, I'll wind up the power and we'll have a look at it once I've reformed the capacitors. Right, so I've brought the power up in stages, from using the variac from maybe 25 volts, and then over a period of an hour or so to the full 240 volts. So electrolytic capacitors have a chance to do some reforming. If I turn it on now, I've got a light here, but the power light doesn't come on, and prop that up. Now that's just the current limit turned down low, so we take that off. We switch these to the B. It looks like the B side is producing volts, and we can set the current limit. So maybe the B power supply is working, but the A isn't. Nothing coming out of that. And that explains this LED as well, because there's a LED on the B side glowing. So the LED up there comes from the A side. So yeah, and that's pretty early in the that LED is pretty early in the scheme of things. Is that focused? I hope so. There's the LED there, so really can't be much more than the bridge rectifiers or the transformer. I doubt the transformer's burnt out, but we shall see. And the controls, back to B again. Seems to be a bit sticky. They might need some contact muck in the pots to make the movement a bit more smooth. I haven't actually tried to see if volts come out, but if they're getting there, they're probably getting there. And I haven't tested the power supply current limit or anything. And there's a buttons here to short out the power supply to set the current limit. So if we put it there, it shorts and you can set the current limit to some value. You see nearly all the range happens in that first bit of rotation. Most rotation doesn't do much, so maybe I've got a log pot or something silly in there. But this button feels like it's a lot of loose in there, but it's not stuck on, but it's in the in position, as opposed to this one which has full travel. So maybe those buttons should be replaced, certainly this one. Next test is the oscillator, see if anything's coming out of that. And just before we look at the oscillator, something I forgot to mention, the power supply uses an LM317 adjustable regulator with a TIP32A to increase its current handling capacity, and they would be at this end of the boards, but they're not there because instead, for some reason, I've replaced them with the two of them with a single device on the back here, which is an LM350K. Again, a adjustable voltage regulator, but 3 amp capacity. So, not sure why I did that. It obviously takes care of getting the heatsink at this end of things, but why else? And it's only 1 amp anyway, isn't it, this thing? in 1 amp, so, and I think a 317 TO220 can do an amp by itself, but okay. Maybe I should, if that turns out to be what's wrong, one of those, then maybe I should just put, well, they put fairly large heat sinks on this thing too, didn't they? Anyway, they're fairly large heat sinks on the back, so yeah. And another thing is that stuff like that probably didn't help the stability of the thing. There's probably all sorts of parasitic inductance and capacitance upsetting the feedback loop, and probably fairly similar sort of stuff going on with the oscillators here, having the a lot of the switching coming out that far to the controls. But, yeah, if that turns out to be a problem, then just throw it in the bin. Okay, let's look at the oscillator. Yeah, I've had a fair fiddle with both oscillators, and no combination of controls makes anything come out on the oscilloscope. So I can understand the A side not working because it looks like it gets its power from the A side power supply module, and the fact that this power lead isn't working indicates there's something wrong with the power, the very start of that power supply, the bridge rectifier and the capacitors. From there on, that's where the power to the first oscillator comes from on the A side, and that might explain why that doesn't work, but the B side should be working. Of course I've got to go through and trace out voltages, but that'll be when I try and repair this thing, not right now. Next thing to have a look at is the amplifier, see if that does anything. And now I've got an oscillator that does work going into the amplifier inputs, just looking at it there on the oscilloscope, 1 kilohertz, and coming out nothing. That's on the B side, which shouldn't have the power supply problems. Maybe the A oscillator and the A amplifier work, and it's only just a fault on the A power supply board, just burn out bridge rectifier or something, and they might still work. But yeah, I wonder if this thing's, I wonder if it's worth the trouble. But yeah, there it is, just for fun. I'll think about it a little bit more. If I do ever repair it, I'll make a video just showing what I found and showing it working. I imagine this isn't of much interest to many people, but well, in case someone was, there it is. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you later.